everyone. This is Jenny Ponzuric, founder of the newer School Psychologist, and I am here today with Kristen McKenna. And she has so nicely said that she would help out and answer some questions from the perspective of someone who has done some interviewing for school psychologists to give some different tips and strategy ideas and answer some of the questions that you guys had sent in to me that you wanted answered. So, Kristen, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, give everyone a little bit of information about who you are and your background?
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Jenny, for asking me to do this. It's actually one of my favorite topics, interviewing, because I've done so much of it myself and also with others that I've really kind of done a lot of research on the topic and about how to improve. So I initially was a psychology major in undergrad, but as with all psychology majors, I needed a job. So I went to work for Marriott International, which is where I'd been working part-time, and I became a food and beverage manager. So through that time, I did a lot of interviewing for staff. We had between 50 and 150 employees, depending on the account that I worked at. So we did all of that HR work. And then I went back to school and became a school psychologist and have been doing that about 14 years. But within that time, I became a senior school psychologist for about 5 years. And then 2.5 years ago, I became an administrator for low incidence programs. And then most recently, I've now inherited the related services program. So I'm back full circle to managing school psychologists. So within that time, I've done a lot of interviewing of interns, practicum students, full school psychologists, contract school psychologists, quite a few, and then also management levels. So it's been an interesting experience to see the different levels and see how people interview. I've also done my own set of interviewing with various districts. There was a time I was trying to escape from my own and did a lot of interviewing, and that was great practice for me to see really what other districts are asking, what they're looking for, because each district is utterly unique in their personality and what they're searching for.
So a lot of times one of the first steps in the whole process is, people are turning in their resumes, their letters of recommendation. So from the district side, they are initially doing paper screenings, right? And depending on, the year and how many school psychologists are out there, sometimes we're only getting a handful of resumes being sent in. And then I know at some times of the year, we can get like 100 different resumes. So a lot of times the first step is paper screening, where there's typically like a group of people who are looking through everything that's been sent in. And obviously there's got to be some sort of narrowing down. So I'm curious from your perspective, what are some things that you look for with resumes and letters of recommendation as you're doing that paper screening, especially in places where they're looking at, 50, 100? What are some ways that you've noticed that people are like standing out?
Yeah, this is very true. We're a very large school district and we do get a ton of applications. So one of the first things we did is we created a rubric for screening. So we're really looking for the basics. Do you have a credential? You'd be amazed how many people apply. If you do not have a credential, you're out. So if you're in progress and you're very close to getting the credential, say, right now we're in March, we know a lot of interns are getting ready. So just be very clear. The credential will be, June 2020. That will keep you in the in pile. We looked for, experience outside of school psychology. That's important too. My background, I do feel is important because I had a lot of previous experience as a manager, and some of those skills are very transferable. Not that, we absolutely pick up school psychologists who are brand new to the field and the job market for sure. But a lot of times we're looking for a variety of someone who's got a little more background, someone who's new to the field, so that we have diversity. And then how do you stand out? So clearly, if you know a second language, that's a great thing to have on there. If you've done some specialized training, that's a great thing to have on there. And so we really were looking at points. Okay, you have experience, you have a credential, you have a specialized skill. I've done a lot of work with autism, or I'm really great with FBAs, FAAs. And then anything, even other certifications, other credentials. If you were a general education teacher, special education teacher, those are excellent crossover skills as a new psychologist. A lot of times people have worked as paraeducators. Those are also great skills. So we know that coming in, you understand the school system and kind of how it works. Awards, grants, if you've worked on grant projects, these are all things. We're really looking for school psychologists that are not going to come in and assess. We're looking for school psychologists who are going to come in and really build a comprehensive psych services program. Are you interested in mental health? Are you interested in behavior? Do you have more background? Have you attended conferences? Have you presented? So all of those things kind of get points. And then you look at just kind of the basics. If a resume is utterly disorganized, we're going to throw it out, because we want to look that people took the time to put the resume together where it's not grammatically incorrect, the spelling is appropriate. If you have some glaring spelling errors, to me it says when you turn in a psychological report to a parent, you're not looking at the detail, especially for a job. That's your best foot forward. We've had, I don't need to know that you had an In-N-Out burger position. I really don't. I mean, okay, if you were a leader, a manager, and you ran a store, sure. But if you just worked part-time at In-N-Out to get through school, not my priority. Make sure that your licenses are current and it's updated. I've had people who have lost credentials apply for jobs, and we go search that and we do background checks. So everything you put on your resume needs to be accurate and current. It's better to really present yourself as you are and not exaggerate, because when you then go to the interview and you're interviewing with people that have been in the field 5, 10, 15, 20 years, they will know. They will know whether you're presenting yourself. I did an interview a week ago for a management position, and one of the applicants talked about a project he was working on related to one of my departments. And I sit on the county board for this particular project. He was not part of it. So, I think he had some interactions. I don't believe he was totally misrepresenting himself, but he didn't know his audience and didn't know that I sat on the SELPA committee for that. So it's just interesting don't oversell yourself either. Present who you are, what you're interested in, and really what you've done. And even if you were part of a committee or you went to a training, that's fine. But be careful whether you say you're leading it and how much work you've put into it, because you just don't know who's sitting in the room, and they may be able to really tell that's not true.
So, without going into the exact questions that are asked in interviews, but because you've been a part of it for many years, what are some typical interview questions? One I always remember is, a lot of times when people come in, they'll say something like, why don't you introduce yourself and bring your resume to life? I remember that one time to kind of just be able to talk a little bit, but not, bring out your resume and start reading, well, in 19, blah, blah, blah. But to be able to just talk in a couple of moments to just kind of have people understand kind of who you are. What are some other kind of typical questions?
The way that we run our interview questions is each of them has a purpose. So obviously you have your introduction question. Tell us about yourself, give us your background. What I always recommend to people is talk about your passion, because there's a huge difference when you say, well, I went to school and I got my degree and now I need a job, versus I went to school because I ran into a student when I was in school who had a visual impairment, and I learned Braille, and I was so passionate about helping the student learn that it just is stuck with it. Just your passion comes out, and you can just see people shift when they really talk about what they're excited about. It also, as people are nervous in interviews, when you're talking about your passion, your nervousness is not as prevalent. So we look at, obviously, assessment. For school psychologists, 60, 70, 80% of your job is assessment. My biggest recommendation to people is, regardless of the district, understand the difference between discrepancy, PSW, and RTI. Even if you're trained in just one, there are districts out there that are still doing 3. It's still the law. So it really... You want to go in not assuming what the district's doing, what their practice is, because they may be utilizing discrepancy still, but moving towards a PSW model. So they're wanting to know people have had that training, or they may still really feel discrepancy is the way they're going. So do a little bit of research. I had an interview 2 weeks ago with another person. She had interviewed one person in each of the departments that she was looking to represent. She called them. She said, what are the concerns you're facing? What are the strengths of your department? She was utterly well prepared because she'd done her research. She'd been on our website. She'd looked at each department and reached out to our lead teachers. RTI is still something, with this MTSS. Have you done positive behavioral intervention and supports training? Are you familiar with response to intervention? How can you build a comprehensive program on your site? We had a conversation the other day about best practice, and it's really hard to do best practice with a district that may be declining budgets. But my argument always is you as an individual have the ability to run your own program with the kids you're working with. So we can always do best practice as individuals. Clearly, we're looking for people that get along with others. We're looking at interpersonal skills. As a school psychologist, I typically come at all my answers from a student-centered perspective. But I'm also careful to assume the people in the room are also student-centered, because sometimes it comes across as I'm here to fight for children, and it gives the assumption as though the people in the room aren't. How do you come in? How are you valuable? I also have recently seen a lot of kind of self-oriented questions. So although you are there to screen whether this district is appropriate for you, by and large, they're screening whether you're appropriate for them. So one of my favorite questions that I ask is, what are you looking for in a school psychologist? So questions at the end, great to clarify, know the timelines, things like that. But when you start really asking detailed questions about, well, what hours am I going to have to work? What days do I have off? That sends a red flag to the employer that it's really about you. And although it is, we don't want to throw that out publicly. Those are all questions that can be answered prior to accepting the job. So your questions really need to be geared towards your interest in working for the district. So it's great to take a look at the questions they're asking you, because that's really driving what they're looking for.
I definitely noticed that with like when I was working with, my different interns, and when they were ready to interview, I was always like, listen for the questions. If 90% of the questions are about assessment, that's what your role is going to be in that district. Whereas like you've talked about an assessment question, an intervention question, a counseling question. In that case, you have this idea that that role, the expectation for that role is going to be a little bit bigger than just an assessment. And knowing that, people listening to this hopefully are, outside of California as well, this is going to be something that's appropriate for, any state. You got to be listening for what are they asking, because you'll get a better idea of what are the needs of that district and the expectations. Exactly. And I think, one of the questions a lot of times we'll always ask is like, what questions do you have? Do you have any questions for us? And like you said, I've definitely been on that side where people are like, what's the insurance kind of situation and how soon? And you're like, this isn't like the appropriate time for that question. But I think to be prepared for that question, a lot of times I hear people ask, now, in addition to what I like to call like correct answers, right? Like sometimes it can be a little nerve-wracking when someone actually doesn't know quite what the answer is supposed to be. But all those other skills, and you've talked about them a little bit already, like, we expect people to be nervous during an interview, right? So one of the things I know that I've looked for is, how do they deal with that nervousness? Because I always equate an interview to like a really difficult parent meeting. And so how they're dealing with this nervousness is kind of like what it's going to look like in that difficult meeting. And so what are some other types of, nonverbal, I guess, types of things that you're looking for? And you've talked about them a little bit about, how they're answering, I want to fight for students' rights, just as I know everyone here is, that would be a way to kind of soften that one a little bit. Anything else you want to add to that?
I think the biggest piece of it to reduce the anxiety is to be prepared. So one of the things that I do is in each of these categories, I have an overarching philosophy. So say we're looking in all of these areas: mental health, assessment, administration, interpersonal skills, data collection, intervention. I actually have a whole outline written out that I work on. So a friend of mine had brought this to my attention. She has her PhD in leadership and she's phenomenal. But she had said, so say you're looking at mental health. What's your overarching philosophy on mental health? I believe all children should have some sort of coping skill building. They may need mental health, whatever it happens to be. So that my philosophy is all students should have social emotional learning. Then within that, I give 3 examples. So in my job, I worked to create a coping skills group for students who were trauma survivors, blah, blah, blah. And I saw this as helpful. I have my PhD in integrated mental health. I believe in this holistic approach to students and that each student has a different type of need or interest or something they relate to. So you kind of have your 3 little support statements. And then you have an example. When I was a school psychologist, I had a student, not disclosing in specific terms. Obviously, confidentiality is very important in school psychology. Be amazed what people release. And when I did this, I really learned from that experience. I had a student who, come to find out, had been going through a divorce and was having some behavior issues. So I really worked to teach that student, how to identify those feelings. So it really kind of brings it, here's my overarching philosophy. Here's 3 reasons why I think it's important. And then here's an example of how I did with it. So I have, every time I go to an interview, I bring those with me. And I've got probably 8 different categories because you can apply those examples almost everywhere. Then I also have a quick 1-sheet paper that I put the 10 things I want to make sure I elaborate on in that interview. So if they don't bring up my skill set regarding mental health, I want to find a way to integrate that into the conversation. So most of the time at the end, I'll say, do you have anything else you want to let us know that we haven't touched on? You go back to that sheet, it's right there in front of you, so you won't forget because you're nervous. So I think from the soft skills side, everybody is utterly nervous. That is just a given. And so that part we kind of ignore in a sense, depending to the level. If someone is utterly terrified, we are probably going to say, how are they going to present if they're in front of an attorney, as you noted? I mean, simple things. How you dress is still important. We had someone who came to an interview a couple months ago in her gardening attire, and she thought it would be great because she wanted to show that she was a person gardening with students. Great thing to highlight, but when you come in and you're dirty and you didn't take the time to say, I know I have an interview today, I'm going to bring a secondary outfit and I'm going to clean up. So although her idea behind that, I understood, it didn't present well. You wouldn't do that going into an IEP with an attorney. You wouldn't go in and say, I just came out of gardening. I mean, I know when I need to wear suits. I know when I'm going to get down on the ground and work with the preschoolers, and I dress accordingly. Shaking people's hands, saying hello, greeting them, introducing yourself, just all of the basic professional skills. And it shows how you'll present in an IEP. Hi, I'm so-and-so. I'm the school psychologist. Pleasure to meet you. It's clear when people are prepared. They bring their resume with them. Even though we have copies, I always bring a copy and offer it in case they don't have it. Just general presentation, I think for me, it just really comes down to, are you here for students or here for yourself? And that is very clear in interviews, who's coming in and wants to serve students. And of course, we all have our needs. But by and large, we're a district that supports students, and I need to know that the person coming in is going to put students first within the boundaries of what's appropriate for them. But I want people that are hardworking. I want people that we work 191 days a year. We have a pretty cush job as far as how much we have to work. So for those 191 days, I want to know I have someone utterly dedicated, someone interested in learning. As Jenny was noting, it's the type of question you ask, it's interest. I really love elementary, but I'm open to high school. What types of jobs are you looking to fill? How does the other staff, are they cohesive? I'm a team person. I'd love to know we're working for a team. I'm constantly looking for additional training. What types of training opportunities might you have? Or should I search out on my own? That kind of stuff. So it's how you phrase it. Mm-hmm. Turning your cell phone off, believe it or not, even the vibrating in the purse, just turn the phone off. You don't need it for that time. Beverages, people will bring in beverages. Water's fine in a water bottle because people get nervous, but I've had people spill it. I've had people leave marks on it. It just seems silly, but all of that stuff should be in a bag or on the floor. You don't want anything in front of you that's super disruptive. We've had people bring other people with them. Not appropriate for an interview. They can wait in the car. I hate to say, I'd love to say we're a little bit more flexible, but if you're really interested in an interview, I hate to say there's babysitters out there that can come for that hour, or you reschedule. I had an emergency with the babysitter. Showing up on time, that is a big one. If someone shows up 10 minutes late for an interview, I'm done. Yeah. So
it sounds like a lot of things about being prepared. And you talked about doing some research ahead of time on the district. There's a lot of information you can get from the district's website. Sounds like you've had some people even contact, obviously within an appropriate realm, right? Other than cold calling somebody.
Right.
And I love the idea of having, like you said, like a copy of your resume or of the letters of recommendation, like having that ready in case someone in the interview doesn't for some reason have that. And I think that then, if you have that inside of a nice folder, you could then have that sheet, like you said, of your top 10 things. that it's right there in front of you. So it doesn't look like you need a backup. It just happens to be right there. So I love that. I love that idea. Awesome.
And I put my questions on that too. So it looks like you put thought into what your questions are going to be prior to. Yep.
Yeah. And I think, in today's day and age, there's no need to memorize everything. We don't ask our kids to memorize too many things anymore. It's all Googleable.
Just your memory is not super effective. So yeah.
Especially when we're nervous. All right. Anything else that you think would be helpful as someone is preparing to interview for a school psych position?
I would say just your overall presentation. Ultimately, I'm a big Brene Brown fan. Boundaries, integrity, and authenticity. Show up as yourself. It's pretty easy to see through people who are kind of putting on a show. There's a lot of people that interview very well and have some of the right things to say, but their answers typically are somewhat on the superficial level. It's very clear when someone doesn't know, and it's actually okay to say you don't know. So that's a great question. I'm not really well versed in that topic because there's been interviews I've had where they've asked very specific information on, say, the demographics of the district. Even though I've done my research, I say, I've done some of my research on your district and look at some of the demographics and give an example. This is what I looked at. I didn't specifically look at that. That's an interesting question. I would like to pursue that more. But it's very clear when sometimes people will come in and feel as though maybe crying in an interview shows your passion. And believe me, I am a crier. I'm not opposed to that. But it comes across as a little bit different than I think people think it's going to. I don't think tears and emotional reactions to stuff in an interview are probably your best foot forward because this is how you're going to handle yourselves in IEP. So think of how you would present yourself in front of a parent. You want to operate with honesty and integrity. But the best interviews I've had are people who are just themselves.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. And if anyone watching this has any follow-up questions, feel free to reach out. Happy to respond.
Thank you, Jenny.
Bye, guys. Thank you, Kristen.